Ladies and gentlemen, listen carefully because what I'm about to say isn't what the mainstream media wants you to hear. The narrative you've been spoon fed is a carefully constructed illusion, one designed to protect political egos rather than reveal economic truth. The title of today's talk says it all. Russia already achieved victory. The West refuses to see it. And that statement, uncomfortable as it may sound, is not just about military movement or territorial lines. It's about economic endurance, strategic patience, and the quiet collapse of Western credibility. Victory belongs to those who prepare, not pretend. It's a principle that history has proven time and time again, yet one that the modern West seems to have forgotten. You cannot fake endurance, you cannot purchase resilience, and you cannot outsource preparation. These are not commodities, they are disciplines. Russia understood this long before the first sanction, the first speech, or the first spark of conflict. While the West was busy celebrating its own narratives, Russia was building the quiet machinery of strength, stockpiling resources, restructuring trade, protecting its currency, and hardening its economy against the inevitable storms of geopolitics. Preparation is the armor that arrogance can never replace, and that is why the West, with all its wealth and technology, finds itself unprepared in a battle it thought it already won. The side that looks strongest is often the most fragile. The West's power today rests on illusions, inflated currencies, hollowed out industries, and political theater disguised as leadership. But illusions can't stand against reality. When the pressure builds, when the markets tremble, and when energy runs short, the only nations that survive are the ones that planned for scarcity while others plan for applause. That's the hook the world missed. Russia wasn't reacting to events. It was preparing for them years in advance. It didn't need to win the world's approval. It needed to win its own survival. The West measures success in quarterly earnings and poll numbers. Russia measures it in decades, in self-sufficiency, in its ability to endure isolation and still move forward. That's the essence of preparation, to live ready, not react panicked. The same holds true for individuals. In your own life, if you're preparing while others are pretending you're already ahead. When crisis hits, people run to safety. The prepared become safety. That's the quiet difference between those who endure and those who vanish in the noise. There's a powerful irony in how the West underestimated Russia. They mistook silence for weakness, patience for passivity, and resilience for retreat. But those who prepare don't need to announce their readiness. The strong don't perform, they plan. And when the moment comes, their calm is terrifying to those who relied on luck instead of discipline. Russia's calm under pressure was the clearest signal of all. They had already accepted the cost long before others even understood the price. That's why victory felt inevitable, because for them, it wasn't a gamble. It was an outcome of preparation meeting opportunity. Preparation is the language of visionaries. It's the art of thinking years ahead when everyone else is trapped in today's convenience. The Western mindset fell into a dangerous illusion, believing that dominance is eternal, that their financial systems are invincible, that their influence is permanent. But dominance without discipline collapses the moment it's challenged. Russia knew that global power wasn't about headlines or hashtags. It was about control over the essentials: energy, production, resources, and mindset. They built an economy that could survive exclusion, while the West built economies that depend on inclusion. When the world started shifting, Russia didn't stumble. It simply kept walking. That's the kind of mental toughness that separates from dreamers. Whether in nations or in people, victory always belongs to those who prepare in silence while others pretend in comfort. Because when the lights go out and the applause fades, all that remains is what you've built beneath the surface. Preparation isn't glamorous. It's often lonely, misunderstood, and even mocked. But it's the only thing that guarantees survival when illusions collapse. The West laughed at Russia's conservatism, mocked its focus on gold reserves and energy independence, and dismissed its efforts to insulate its economy. Now the latter has stopped, and the results speak louder than any speech. The real hook here is this: preparation is the most underestimated form of power. Those who prepare control the future, those who pretend merely rent it. Russia's victory didn't happen on the battlefield. It happened in boardrooms, in energy fields, in the discipline of planning, while the rest of the world was distracted by drama. The West was too busy feeling powerful to remember what real power requires: sacrifice, patience, and foresight. And that's the eternal law. The prepared always inherit the storm because they built their shelter long before the clouds appeared. Every sanction meant to break Russia only broke the illusion of Western dominance. That's the paradox that no politician in Washington or Brussels dares to admit. The entire sanctions campaign was built on arrogance, the belief that the West's financial system was an unbreakable weapon, that control over global money meant control over global behavior. But what the architects of this economic war didn't understand was that pressure doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it forges something far stronger. Russia became the living proof that when you corner a nation built on endurance, you don't defeat it, you awaken it. Sanctions were supposed to be a punishment, but instead they became the catalyst for transformation. The West miscalculated because it assumed that power equals dependence. It believed Russia's strength came from integration with the Western system, when in reality, that connection was the weakest link. Once the sanctions hit, Russia did what every resilient entity must do. It learned to stand on its own. In that moment, the illusion of Western superiority began to crumble, because the truth is simple: the system that relies on compliance is fragile. The system that thrives on adaptation is unbreakable. The Western world confused economic dominance with permanence, but permanence belongs only to those who can evolve under fire. Here's the hook: sanctions don't reveal weakness, they reveal truth. And the truth was brutal for the West. The more they sanctioned, the more they exposed their own vulnerability. Europe found itself freezing without Russian gas. The United States faced inflation it could no longer control. Global South nations began questioning the morality of a system that could freeze assets and weaponize currency at will. For decades, the dollar's strength came from trust, not force. But when the West used its financial system as a weapon, it shattered that trust forever. The rest of the world took notes and quietly began building a new system, one that doesn't bow to Washington or Brussels. Russia understood something that every serious economist knows: economic independence is not a luxury, it's survival. When the sanctions came, they didn't break the Russian spirit, they hardened it. Domestic production surged, new alliances formed, trade routes shifted eastward. The ruble, which the West expected to collapse, rebounded stronger than anyone predicted. The message was unmistakable: when your economy is built on real assets, energy, agriculture, resources, and not endless debt and digital printing, you can outlast any storm. That's not luck. That's structural power. The West's leaders were blindsided because they believed in their own myths. They assumed that money equals value, that GDP equals strength, that digital wealth could replace tangible productivity. But Russia's survival shattered those illusions. The sanctions exposed the hollow nature of Western prosperity, economies running on credit, consumption, and speculation. Russia, meanwhile, went back to fundamentals, production, resource control, and trade in real goods. That shift wasn't just economic, it was philosophical. It was a return to reality in a world obsessed with financial fiction. Think about it. Every time the West tried to turn up the pressure, it only accelerated Russia's independence. Energy that once flowed to Europe now fuels Asia. Financial ties with the dollar were replaced with direct settlements in national currencies. Even gold, the asset that the West abandoned for paper, became a cornerstone of Russia's financial defense. The sanctions meant to isolate Moscow ended up isolating the very institutions that imposed them, because power built on control is fleeting. Power built on necessity endures. And that's where the real victory lies. Sanctions didn't just fail to bring Russia down. They brought clarity to the world. They showed emerging nations that sovereignty is still possible, that you don't need to bow to the Western banking order to survive. They showed that wealth built on real assets can't be canceled by decree. The West thought it was testing Russia's economy. In reality, it was testing its own credibility, and the results were devastating for them. The hook is simple but profound. Pressure doesn't create weakness, it exposes it. When the West turned its economic weapons on Russia, it discovered that its own systems were far more fragile than it ever imagined. You can't sanction reality. You can't freeze resilience. You can't bankrupt a nation that still believes in production over printing. The lesson here reaches far beyond geopolitics. It's universal. In life, in markets, in nations, the moment you face real pressure, the truth of your foundation is revealed. Russia's foundation was built on endurance. The West's was built on illusion. And when the winds of reality began to blow, it became clear which one would stand. Independence is the new power. In an age where nations have traded sovereignty for convenience, Russia stands as a reminder that real strength comes not from alliances of comfort, but from the ability to survive without permission. The modern West has forgotten what independence truly means. It built its power on global interdependence, cheap imports, outsourced production, and the illusion that technology can replace self-sufficiency. Russia, however, chose a different path. When the storm came, it didn't need to beg for energy. It didn't need to plead for trade routes. And it didn't need to borrow from tomorrow to survive today. That's not luck. That's design. True independence isn't about isolation. It's about having the capacity to endure when the world turns its back. Dependence is the quiet destroyer of empires. It creeps in when nations forget how to produce and start depending on others to sustain their prosperity. The West outsourced its factories, outsourced its energy, outsourced its very stability, and in doing so, it outsourced its power. Russia did the opposite. It invested in agriculture, expanded its energy infrastructure, and built internal systems that could function even under maximum external pressure. When sanctions try to cut it off, Russia simply pivoted, adapting its supply chains, finding new partners, and producing what it once imported. The message was clear: independence is not an option. It's survival insurance in a world driven by volatility. The West often mocks self-reliance is outdated, as though globalism has erased the need for national strength. But globalism without independence is dependency disguised as progress. You can't call yourself powerful if you can't feed your people, heat your homes, or defend your currency. Russia's model proves that independence is the only sustainable definition of power. When energy prices skyrocketed, Moscow profited. When supply chains broke, it innovated. The West, meanwhile, scrambled for temporary fixes, revealing just how brittle its foundations have become. The difference wasn't technological, it was philosophical. Russia chose self-sufficiency as its strategy, while the West chose dependency as its comfort. There's a timeless truth here. Those who control essentials control the future. Russia's command over energy, food, and natural resources gave it leverage no sanction could erase. The West still doesn't understand that power isn't in paper promises or printed currency. It's in control over the real economy. You can't eat digital dollars. You can't heat your homes with financial derivatives. Power belongs to those who can provide, produce, and persist. And when global systems began to tremble, Russia's independence became its shield. It didn't need to shout about its strength. It simply demonstrated it through stability. The hook is this: freedom begins when you no longer need permission to survive. Russia's independence has become its liberation from the Western order. By reducing its reliance on Western financial systems, diversifying its trade, and strengthening domestic industries, it achieved something far greater than economic recovery. It achieved autonomy. And autonomy is the currency of the future. Nations that depend on others to sustain their prosperity are already bankrupt in principle. Independence, on the other hand, allows a country to act with purpose, not panic, to make decisions out of strength, not desperation. This lesson extends far beyond geopolitics. It applies to individuals, economies, and institutions alike. Dependence is easy. It feels safe while the system works, but it leaves you powerless when the system breaks. Independence is difficult. It demands discipline, foresight, and sacrifice, but it guarantees survival when others fall. Russia's journey is a powerful reminder that those who build their own foundation don't fear collapse. They welcome disruption because it exposes who truly holds power. While the West continues to talk about democracy and unity, its economies are enslaved to debt, imports, and energy crisis. Independence doesn't come from slogans. It comes from control over production, over resources, over destiny. Russia's resilience comes from years of preparation that allowed it to withstand pressure without pleading for help. It didn't collapse when cut off. It recalibrated. It didn't panic when isolated. It innovated. And that's the heart of independence, the quiet confidence that you can survive, not because others allow it, but because you've earned it through discipline and foresight. Independence, in the end, is the new definition of power in a collapsing world order. It's not about defiance for its own sake. It's about reclaiming the right to exist without dependence on fragile systems. Russia already understood what the West has yet to learn. When you depend on others for your prosperity, you've already lost control of your future. Real freedom is not granted. It's built, it's protected, and it's sustained through self-reliance. And when the global tides shift, as they inevitably do, the nations that can stand alone will not only survive, they'll lead. Economic reality always wins over political fantasy. You can manipulate narratives, you can stage alliances, and you can flood the media with optimism, but you cannot rewrite the laws of economics. Eventually, every illusion collapses under the weight of truth. The West has been living on borrowed time and borrowed money, believing that political will can override financial gravity. But as any serious economist knows, You can't legislate prosperity, you can't print productivity, and you can't borrow your way to strength. Russia understood this fundamental law long before the current crisis. While Western leaders were crafting speeches, Russia was crafting strategy. While the West was creating headlines, Russia was creating reserves. And when the political fantasy began to unravel, only those grounded in reality remained standing. The West's problem is not lack of intelligence, it's addiction to illusion. For decades, it has replaced production with consumption, savings with credit, and industry with speculation. Politicians promised infinite growth in a finite world, using debt as the new currency of comfort. But economic reality doesn't bend to hope, it demands accountability. Russia, on the other hand, rebuilt its economy around fundamentals, energy, agriculture, and manufacturing. It focused on tangible assets rather than financial abstractions. So when the global shocks came, Russia had something the West no longer possesses: real wealth. You can't sanction oil out of the ground, and you can't freeze resilience in a spreadsheet. The numbers always tell the truth, even when politicians refuse to. Economic truth is the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner. You can delay it, you can disguise it, but you can't escape it. When the West weaponized its financial system against Russia, it believed that its economic dominance was eternal. But dominance built on debt is a mirage. Russia's economic model, though imperfect, was grounded in production. It produced energy, food, raw materials, the essentials that sustain civilizations. The West produced credit, digital assets, and political rhetoric. And when crisis struck, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Russia could heat its homes and feed its people. The West could only print more money and hope inflation wouldn't devour the middle class. The tragedy of political fantasy is that it always sounds noble. Politicians promise stability, security, and endless prosperity. But behind every promise lies the same arithmetic problem. The bill always comes due. Russia learned through hardship that economic discipline is not optional, it's survival. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, it faced the brutal consequences of ignoring economic truth. That experience became its greatest teacher. The West, in contrast, hasn't faced such reckoning in generations. It has forgotten what scarcity feels like, what debt really means, what inflation can destroy, and so it continues down the same road, piling illusion upon illusion, as if confidence alone can sustain an empire. Russia's victory isn't about outsmarting the West, it's about outlasting it. While Western economies are drowning in deficits and dependency, Russia's discipline has given it breathing room. When a nation bases its strength on what it can produce, it becomes immune to manipulation. That's why economic reality always wins, because it rewards those who create and punishes those who consume without contributing. The West built its power on the assumption that the world would always need its currency. But that assumption is cracking. Nations are finding alternatives, trade is shifting, and the world is slowly detaching from the dollar's dominance. The fantasy is fading, replaced by the hard truth that no system built on perpetual debt can endure. The hook that no one wants to confront is this: the West's greatest enemy isn't Russia, China, or any foreign power. It's mathematics. You cannot spend more than you earn forever. You cannot inflate your way to stability. You cannot rely on political promises to replace productive capacity. Russia saw this long before the world did. It accepted short-term pain for long-term strength. It endured sanctions, market shocks, and isolation, but it emerged with something invaluable: control. Control over its currency, over its resources, over its destiny. Meanwhile, The West traded control for comfort and called it progress. The beauty of economic reality is its fairness. It doesn't play politics. It doesn't care about ideologies or alliances. It rewards discipline, punishes recklessness, and exposes hypocrisy. Russia's victory is not a celebration of power, it's a vindication of principle. The same principle that governs every successful system, that wealth must be earned, not decreed. The West still believes it can bend these rules, that it can create prosperity from debt and security from illusion. But history is clear. Every empire that ignored economic law collapsed under its own weight. Russia chose to respect those laws, and now, while the West struggles to sustain its fantasies, Moscow's stability speaks louder than any propaganda. In the end, the truth is simple. You can't outvote reality. Economic fundamentals don't care about press conferences or promises. They care about production, savings, and discipline. And when nations forget this, no amount of rhetoric can save them. The West built its empire on the illusion of limitless power. Russia built its future on the recognition of limits. And that's why when the smoke clears, the scoreboard won't be written in headlines. It will be written in balance sheets. Pain builds power. Comfort breeds collapse. It's a truth as old as civilization itself, yet one that the modern West seems determined to forget. Nations, like individuals, grow through adversity, not ease. Comfort breeds complacency, and complacency breeds decay. The West has lived for decades in the illusion of permanent comfort, endless credit, cheap energy, and easy living, all financed by debt and delusion. Russia, on the other hand, has lived through hardship, through sanctions, through internal trials that would have broken weaker nations. And in that furnace of pressure, it didn't crumble. It forged strength. Pain became its teacher, its motivator, and ultimately its shield. Suffering, when faced with purpose, becomes transformation. The West has grown allergic to discomfort. It avoids pain as if it were poison. But pain is the price of discipline, and discipline is the foundation of survival. Russia didn't escape pain. It embraced it. When sanctions hit, when the ruble was attacked, when the world tried to isolate it, Russia didn't collapse into chaos. It adapted. The hardships became catalysts for innovation, self-reliance, and national unity. That's how true power is built, not in comfort, but in the crucible of struggle. Comfort creates illusion, pain creates progress. The Western model teaches that progress is linear, that wealth can be created endlessly without sacrifice. But history tells a different story. Every empire that became too comfortable lost its edge. Comfort dulls instincts, softens resolve, and blinds societies to danger. Russia's path, though harsh, maintained its edge. When everything comfortable was stripped away, what remained was willpower. And willpower, not luxury, determines destiny. You can't buy resilience. You can only earn it through hardship. Russia has learned to endure hunger, isolation, and pressure, while the West trembles at the mere mention of inconvenience. What the West doesn't realize is that its endless pursuit of comfort has made it weak. Its economies depend on cheap money. Its politics depend on appeasement, and its people depend on systems they no longer understand. The very foundations of its prosperity rest on the illusion that nothing can go wrong, that growth, credit, and consumption will continue forever. But when comfort is the goal, decline is inevitable. The strongest muscles are built under tension, not relaxation. Russia, forced to survive under pressure, built its strength where the West built fragility. When the world turned cold, it was the nation accustomed to hardship that stood warm. Pain builds power because it exposes truth. It reveals what you are made when everything else is stripped away. Russia's economic pain forced it to confront inefficiencies, to innovate domestically, to become independent. Sanctions didn't paralyze it, they purified it. They burned away dependency and forced a rediscovery of national purpose. The West mistook this pain for weakness because it doesn't understand the value of struggle. It believes that stability is achieved through avoidance of pain, but that's not stability. That's stagnation dressed in comfort. Real stability comes from having survived the worst and emerging stronger. For it, luxury is temporary, but discipline lasts forever. The West has been living in a luxury bubble, mistaking convenience for civilization. Russia, through hardship, has rediscovered something the West lost long ago, the will to endure. It's that will that transforms pain into strength, setbacks into strategy, isolation into independence. When a nation learns to survive pain, it becomes unstoppable. You can pressure it, sanction it, isolate it, but you can't break it because it has already lived through the breaking point and emerged intact. Pain also creates unity. When a society faces collective hardship, it learns the value of cohesion. The West is fragmenting under abundance, divided by excess, weakened by self-interest. Russia's struggle has created the opposite effect, a society more focused, more resilient, more united by shared sacrifice. That's what makes pain powerful. It strips away illusions and brings clarity. A comfortable society argues over luxury. A tested society fights for purpose. And when the next crisis hits, it won't be the comfortable who lead. It will be the prepared, the hardened, the ones who have already faced the storm. There's an undeniable lesson here for both nations and individuals. If you want to grow stronger, stop chasing comfort. Pain is not your enemy, it's your instructor. It sharpens your instincts, reveals your flaws, and demands your evolution. The West avoided pain for too long, and now it stands fragile, dependent, and unprepared. Russia walked through pain and found power on the other side. And that's the unspoken truth. Those who endure discomfort today inherit strength tomorrow. Pain is the currency of progress, and those who refuse to pay it will eventually lose everything they thought they could protect with comfort. The real war is for financial freedom. It's not fought with tanks, missiles, or troops. It's fought with currencies, systems, and control. The battlefield is the global financial network, and the weapons are interest rates, sanctions, and digital ledgers. For decades, the West believed that it owned this battlefield, that by controlling the dollar, it controlled the world. But that illusion is shattering. Russia's victory isn't just geopolitical, it's economic liberation from a system designed to keep nations dependent. And that's the hook. The future will not belong to those who dominate through coercion, but to those who can operate outside the reach of it. Financial freedom is the new sovereignty, and Russia has already begun claiming it, while the West still denies the war exists. The dollar's dominance once seemed untouchable, but power built on trust dies when that trust is betrayed. When Western governments froze Russian assets, they didn't just target Moscow. They warned every nation holding reserves in dollars that their wealth was conditional. It was a seismic revelation. Suddenly, economic independence wasn't a philosophical goal. It was a survival strategy. Russia, cornered by design, began building an alternative system, trading in local currencies, strengthening gold reserves, and forging financial alliances with Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. It began detaching itself from the Western framework that had long dictated the rules. That act of rebellion, of monetary self-determination, was the moment the real war began. Financial freedom isn't just about wealth, it's about power over your destiny. The West economic system thrives on dependency. Nations borrow in dollars, trade in dollars, save in dollars, and as a result, surrender control. It's a sophisticated form of dominance disguised as partnership. But Russia's resistance exposed the weakness of that system. Once one major nation breaks free, others follow. That's the contagion Washington truly fears, the spread of independence. You can sanction a country, but you can't sanction an idea. And the idea that the world can operate without the dollar is now spreading faster than any political narrative can suppress. Here's the deeper truth. Financial freedom demands sacrifice. It's not achieved by slogans or speeches, but by restructuring economies, redefining alliances, and sometimes enduring hardship. Russia took that path. It accepted short-term pain for long-term sovereignty. It allowed inflation to spike, interest rates to soar, and imports to collapse, knowing that only through discipline could it escape the financial leash of the West. Meanwhile, Western economies, addicted to easy money and artificial growth, can't even raise rates without triggering panic. That's the difference between resilience and dependence. Russia learned to live without Western credit. The West can't imagine living without it. The hook here is powerful. Control the money, and you control the man. The West's monetary dominance allowed it to dictate policy across the globe without firing a shot. But every system based on control eventually overreaches. By weaponizing finance, the West exposed its greatest weakness. Its empire rests not on production, but on perception. Once nations stop believing in the dollar's invincibility, the spell breaks. Russia didn't destroy that confidence overnight, but it cracked the foundation. Each transaction in rubles, yuan, or gold is a brick removed from the dollar's global throne. Slowly, the balance of power is shifting, not through revolution, but through quiet rejection. Financial freedom is also a mindset. It's the recognition that security doesn't come from folding foreign reserves, but from controlling your own production, your own trade, your own value system. Russia's pivot to self-reliance wasn't isolationism. It was economic adulthood. The West sees independence as rebellion because it threatens its authority. But in truth, Russia's actions are a model for every nation tired of being a client state in a global credit casino. You cannot be free if your wealth is stored in someone else's vault or if your prosperity depends on another nation's printing press. The lesson is simple. Financial dependence is modern slavery. It's silent, invisible, and enforced through policy rather than chains. Russia's defiance has forced the world to confront this uncomfortable truth. Nations are now reconsidering where they hold their reserves, how they trade, and who truly benefits from the existing system. The global order built on Western finance is cracking because it was never built on equality. It was built on control. Russia's push for alternatives, from the bureaucratic currency framework to energy-backed trade, represents not just self-preservation, but evolution. The real war isn't about territory. It's about transaction. It's about who defines value and who enforces it. The West's dominance was built on a promise that its system was fair and stable, but that promise is fading under the weight of inflation, debt, and distrust. Russia's pursuit of financial freedom has become a symbol of a larger awakening, a realization that sovereignty is worthless if your economy can be shut down with a keystroke. That's why this victory is deeper than politics. It's philosophical. It's the return of control to those who earn it, not those who manipulate it. In a world where everything from media to markets is controlled by invisible financial strings, breaking free from that system isn't just strategy, it's survival. The true revolution of our time isn't military, it's monetary. The nations that dare to control their own money will control their own future. And while the West continues to fight for perception, Russia has already secured something far more valuable: independence.